Good evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm your host, John Ronan, and as you know now, well into our 36th year, I interview writers about their craft, what they're working on, what they've accomplished, what they might be planning for the future. It is, however, a slightly wider net. We have had on painters, we've had on sculptors, we've had on musicians. So if you have an idea for a writer or perhaps another brand of artist who might be a good fit for the Writer's Block, watch for our address at the end of the show. We'd be very happy to get your suggestions. I also want to remind you that the Writer's Block and all the other original programming that comes out of 1623 Studios is a result of cable access television, a wonderful community asset that you don't get with other means of accessing the internet. So please stick with the Writer's Block, stick with cable. I'm happy to say tonight we do have a writer, a poet by the name of Carol Seitchik. She has written a wonderful book, which we're going to show you on the screen, The Distance from Odessa. And it's a solid book of poetry. I don't always say that. It's a very, very fine book, and I recommend it. Carol, welcome to the Writer's Block.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
As I mentioned before the show started, I wanted to get some general background. Can you tell us something about where you were born and raised, where you went to school, and how you found the North Shore above Boston?
I was born outside of Philadelphia, raised there for the first 18 years. I went to, and I was always an artist, and I went to art school. I went to Tyler School of Art, which is Temple University's art school, and got my graduate degree in art education and taught for a while. And I was a lecturer at the Philadelphia Museum of Art for a while. Then I got married, found myself moving to the Boston area. So I live in Beverly. And most of my life I was an artist doing sculpture. And somehow I found myself starting to write from journals, and I was writing in journals and said, well, this is interesting writing. Why don't I join a poetry group? And I don't know why I joined the poetry group, but I did, and I just fell in love with poetry.
I forgot to read, as part of your introduction, the paragraph describing you in the back of the book. I'm going to go back and retrieve that myself because it mentions some of the poetry groups that you were in and also some of your publications. So Carol Seitchik comes to poetry from a long career in the visual arts. Her poems have been published in the anthologies A Feast of Cape Ann Poets, The Practicing Poet, Poetry Diversified, an anthology of human experience. She was also, as well as in Gemini Press, and Momeg Review and others. She currently works as an independent visual arts curator and lives near Boston with her husband. I was editing a little bit as I went along there. Forgive me for forgetting that. This book is titled The Distance from Odessa, and it's really a journey, or journeys, plural, beginning with Odessa, coming here, going back, going to Israel, coming back here. When did you get the idea for this book?
Well, it's just living is part of the journey. So, my grandparents immigrating from, 3 out of the 4 of them immigrated from Ukraine. My grandmother from Odessa and 2 grandfathers from Kiev. And then my daughter emigrated to Israel. So it's like 4 generations, sort of one coming in and one leaving.
So your daughter was born on the North Shore here?
My daughter actually was born in Philadelphia,
Oh,
where I'm from. And after moving here, she met an Israeli, and that's a story in itself. But she is married to an Israeli, and we have 2 Israeli grandchildren. They happen to be living here in the United States right now. But it's a story of coming into this country and then leaving this country, and the couple of generations in between.
I found the writing very sympathetic, very clean, and I marked many lines that just jumped out. I wonder if you could pick a poem of your choice to start out and read for us.
I'll start with the very first poem of the book, called Leaving.
Okay.
And I have an epigraph: open, closed, open. That's all we are. That's Yehuda Amichai. After lament and the gathering of storms, there was the departure. They left for sanctuary in the season of hope, a time of harvest, rivers brimming on banks, a promise ahead. It began like that, in the turning, in the wind, the reality of uncertainty. The first ones arrived in various ports, so much left behind. Did loneliness arrive with them? What held them in the midst of those who claimed the air of this earth? They kept the rough edges to themselves, some weeping through. They spoke Yiddish, gathered at the table, lit candles on Shabbos, said blessings over challah, over wine, ate borscht, ate kugel, tucked history under their arms, constructed lives among the artful, and carried on until they no longer felt immigrant.
Very nice. One of the lines that jumped out for me is the last line of the second stanza, the reality of uncertainty. I love that, because the reality of an unimagined reality is very strong.
Right.
And that's the first poem in the section called Migration.
Right.
And it largely is about your ancestors coming here.
Right.
Can you pick another poem that you might extend from that beginning the next, or represent from that beginning the next stages of the Odyssey? The Odyssey from Odessa.
Well, maybe The Distance from Odessa.
Yes, the title poem.
The title
Wonderful.
poem.
Okay, that's page 9.
The Distance from Odessa. I understood that grandmothers from another country were supposed to look and talk a certain way. 5 feet in both directions, bosom and belly on the same plane, and wouldn't every grandchild inch away like me, as my grandmother pulled me toward her with thick peasant hands, grabbing my face, pinching my cheeks. Shena Punum, she would say. Back in Odessa, she said, it always felt like war. We shouldn't ever know, she would say. We are now in the hands of... She spoke Yiddish, had no time for God. Where was he, anyhow? My grandmother was a small woman in a dark printed dress, sensible tie shoes, who went to the butcher the day before Seder to buy a kosher chicken, bleed it, pluck the feathers, clip the toenails before cutting off the legs for the best broth, who went to the fish market to buy live carp and pike, that swam in her bathtub until time to cook and chop, knead into gefilte fish. I kept asking her year after year, how did you leave Russia? She would always say, I left in a hurry.
That's a wonderful close. It's another little segment I've got marked here. And I like her character. It comes out through a couple of lines. She's a little sardonic. No time for God. Where was he anyhow? And then the difficulty in leaving Russia is handled in a similar way, just in a hurry.
Right.
Did you know her?
I did. I did know my grandmother. And she spoke Yiddish, but she had some English.
Do you speak any Yiddish?
No, my parents were both fluent Yiddish speakers, and they would speak Yiddish so that the children wouldn't understand, so that they would be talking about us or about any kind of issue, and they used Yiddish for that. So they didn't want us to learn, but we did learn some because...
By mistake.
Right.
In fact, there's a little Yiddish here. Then you explain it in the valuable notes in the back. Shener punim. What does that mean, please?
Pretty face.
Pretty face.
Yeah.
I was impressed by the way you captured, as you do in this poem, the characters and through their characteristics very, very briefly, which is a mark of good condensed poetry. Did some of the characters seem more real and more easily retrieved than others?
Sure. Yes. It's coming from a Jewish background, and so many immigrants from Russia. My grandparents were not. Were not interested in talking about where they came from, their background. It was,
looking forward.
It was definitely looking forward. Yeah. And the background wasn't an easy one. There were pogroms that caused them to leave. And I do have a poem in here about my grandfather leaving and why he left and the struggle to get here.
Would you like to read that?
Yeah, I can read that one. Let me see where that... It's called The Grandfather I Never Knew.
What page is that?
13. And there are 3 parts to the poem, a little different voice, but you'll catch on to that. And the first one is in my grandfather's voice. The grandfather I never knew. I will leave Kiev on a clear night when the moon guides my way along the Dnieper River, mist-filled bulrushes lining the way. In the darkness, I'll avoid highway gangs and border guards looking for the likes of me trying to leave the country. Pogroms are smoldering and attacks on Jews are imminent. I am fearful that I will be caught and sent back. I'll pack a small suitcase, a satchel, and dollars. The railways will transport me through Europe. You can't imagine how many want to leave. Once in Liverpool, I hear that we stay in overcrowded lodging houses. It could take weeks before we are able to board. How so much could go wrong, where it begins, where it ends, what is left behind. I was never told the stories of life in 1894 Kiev, the year he left, never to look back. At 18, my Yiddish-speaking grandfather journeyed across the sea in a steamship newly designed for a 10-day journey packed with others seeking refuge. Perhaps he was placed in steerage along with other youth. As one of 7 siblings, did he travel alone? Arriving in Philadelphia, he apprentices to a tailor with skills perhaps acquired in Kiev, an artisan center for fashions of the day. And in my voice, year after year, I see a photograph of you, Wolf, on the wall of the company that bears your name, and I search for the immigrant transplanted. I cherish the one story that I am told, that each morning before work, you would stroll through the park by your house. I can picture you, eager for success, and I think of freedom, its power. Today, the wind blows, it's spring and cool. I took my walk this morning along a wooded path, ferns and mosses in rebirth, and I'm reminded of you and new beginnings and the dream, what it has to offer, what it takes.
Very nice closure. Closure is a tough job in poetry. But what it has to offer could be the end, but it's deepened markedly by what it takes. I like that. I like that touch very much. I mentioned earlier, before we went on, that it's convenient that this book comes out now, or that the wars are going on right now that make words like Odessa, with sometimes one S, sometimes two S's, and Kiev very familiar to the American population. And I don't think, before this war, the Ukrainian war, 9 out of 10 people couldn't find Odessa on a map.
Right.
It's right on the coast of the Black Sea. I always thought that was a very romantic name, up there with Barcelona and Dakar and a couple other names.
Well, this book was written before, and one is about Ukraine, and the other one is about Israel, and it was written before both wars began. I mean, it was starting to be written about before, and lo and behold, I have a book on Ukraine and Israel, and trouble in both countries. So
yeah, it's. I try to watch less and less of the news. It just makes me mad. I was impressed by the fact, and you have a note about this, that there's a rabbi described in this, and for keeping food on the table, he hangs wallpaper.
Right.
And I didn't know that was common. I think now in the United States, like the synagogue here pays the rabbi, and the rabbi doesn't have to hang wallpaper.
Right.
But certainly it wasn't that way.
So our house was built in 1928. So
In Beverly.
In Beverly. So it's in the 20s, and the rabbi there's a synagogue there in Beverly, and I'm assuming, he had a signature on our wall.
Yeah, you mentioned that. It's the title of the poem, the signature. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I want to say a couple of Ukraine. I like the idea that the journey isn't just one direction or one person. It goes back to the past, comes back to the future, or the present, and then spends some time meditating on the future. How did you decide to organize this? It's in two major groupings: migration and so many worlds.
Well, one sort of dealt with coming into this country and what that generation brought with it, and my generation. And then, lo and behold, my daughter marries an Israeli, and so then immigrates to Israel. So she actually has dual citizenship at this point.
Did she meet him there in Israel? Or?
It's a very long story. We've known him since he was 1 and she was 5. So, as my husband says, it's like an arranged marriage. Although, I mean, and they split apart for years. And then after he got out of the Israeli army, he traveled and came to the United States. And it just so happened that he dropped in on us to say hello, and my daughter was there, and the rest is history. Yeah.
So that's maybe another book.
That's another book.
I mentioned that I wanted you to read whatever you chose to read. I had a couple of suggestions of my own. Do you have other poems lined up for us?
Well, not really. There are plenty of poems that I can read. I can go to the second section.
Uh-huh.
And, well, let me see if there's anything. Yeah, I'll go to the second section. And I can just start with a very short poem called on page 36 6 called Place for my daughter.
Yes, place.
Consider the many roads, the feverish pace, the hustle, the language of another. You will become rooted there like the towering eucalyptus seeding itself in all directions. Place enters everyone's skin. Perhaps you feel a belonging, impatient to learn this land, the turmoil of its history. Live deeply, embrace the depths, learn what it takes to sweeten there in this land of passion, bittersweet as it is.
That's very nice, and I have underlined here, place enters everyone's skin. I think that's it's almost biological process. I think that's very important. Place is very important in my work, too. I like that very much. I have a request.
Yes.
There's a poem that, well, many, many poems, all of them in the book together impressed me. But a couple of poems, because we have brief time, I wanted to just mention the To Retrieve Eden. I can't read my own writing. To Retrieve Eden, I think, is a very interesting poem. And I'd like to, if you would share that with us. I'm not finding it just right off the bat. It's page 45. I was in love with the title, too. I love the assonance of Retrieving Eden.
To retrieve Eden. It is not coincidence that this land between Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea inhabits the lowest place on the planet, with waters infused with salt, and nothing thrives, where a people crossed a sea where the waters parted and a people arrived and stopped wandering. Now the reverence is gone. Betrayal hovers where the earth has darkened, because checkpoints and barrier walls and soldiers with their AK-47s are determined to retrieve Eden. But those in this aromatic land are always cleaning out wounds. Peace arrives on the edge, always, dividing reason into us and them, how things came to be the way they are.
That's a marvelous poem, and I love the concept that soldiers with AK-47s are determined, and there's the title, to retrieve Eden.
I mean, that could have been written today, literally today, from Israel. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a very, very, very strong poem. The book could be described as, in a way, as a memoir of yourself, but also a memoir in the voice of, or in the consciousness of your ancestors. What would you recommend to somebody who has personal memories and wants to write poetry about that? How did you start, and what would you recommend to somebody else with those general ideas?
I journaled a lot.
Journaled.
And so I did journaling for years. And it was really out of the journaling that, and my mother lived till 102, so she lived for a long time. So, I got to hear who she was and her stories, as limited as they were, because she didn't like to tell stories. I would sort of try and get those stories out of her. And just, sort of gathering everything from my journals together. And I thought, well, this is interesting. But basically I will tell you how my poetry writing started. I'm a visual artist, and I was working in my studio, and I was doing these large drawings of heads. And every day I would come into my studio, and I would draw a head. I would put it up on the wall, and it was day after day after day, and I just went around my studio, and I just put these heads up. And finally, there was the last space on my studio, and I said, okay, that's it. I'm finished. And then I came into the studio the next day and sat down and I said, okay, you're first. Who are you? And I started writing. And then I said, interesting, and who are you? And they were just very interesting looking faces. And I really liked what I wrote, and liked much more than what was in my journals. And I thought, and I had a friend who started going to a poetry group, and I said, can I come with you? And she said, sure. And that was the beginning, the very beginning of my poetry writing, and that was just about 20 years ago, maybe 23 years ago. So I had no idea I was going to be a poet or a writer, and it just, the poetry fascinated me, what other people had.
Yeah.
And I just,
Well,
in my first poetry meeting, they said to me, do you have a poem? And I said, no, but I will next time. So that was the very beginning.
Yeah, I like your advice at first, to write, journal, whatever. Just put some words down on paper. Don't think about, well, I'll be inspired one day or something. Just sit down and write.
Right, or go out for a walk and let your mind just go, which is a good way to, get the ideas going, for me.
We're close to time. Can you pick out one more poem to read for us before we have to leave? It's a fairly short poem. We only have a minute and a half.
Okay, So Many Worlds.
What page?
Page 46.
Okay.
By the river, I watch a crow lift one leg, balance on a small stump. The breeze ruffles its black mantle. Green parrots fly by in their frenzy like little bombers. One flies into a small knothole in the tree. Another tries to enter, but clearly there is no room. That's how it is here. Other worlds trying to live inside this world, where history grabs at the future, where the present offers nothing unforgotten. Like Nazareth, ancient, biblical, where I arrive at El Babur Spice Shop on Annunciation Road, just past Mary's Well, near the old Muslim cemetery. So many claim this land, who inherits and what? Reality becomes inarticulate. Each time when I return home 6,000 miles away, the question arises, will my daughter, now the Israeli, come back home? I think about home, how it lands on me, all that confusion finding home. But she has 2 small daughters and a husband born with the land in their breath. They name it home, just like the mourning doves perched by my window, dawn and dusk, chanting, the way home can be so persistent.
Very nice. Very nice. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
For reading that poem. Thank you very much for sharing the distance from Odessa.
Delightful to be reading. Thank you.
I want to thank you and TV Land for being with us as well. If you've learned something about poetry and a long, multi-generational journey in the distance from Odessa, from Carol Seitchik, then the Writer's Block has done its job. Thanks for being with us, and I hope to see you again next time on the Writer's Block. Good night.